Hey there, lovely people. Welcome back to another Story Study Saturday. I'm Sammy, and I'm a writer who likes to learn about writing through reading and share what I learned with you. This week, I am talking about Gifted by Kora Greenwood, and let me just say, I was absolutely desperate to love this book. I found Kora's TikTok, and she was like, I've been trying to find a book that made me feel the way that Divergent made me feel, and so I wrote it, and I saw that TikTok, and I was like, that's great. I liked how Divergent made me feel. I'll read your book. So now here we are, and I'm always gonna try and support a independent author, especially if their book sounds interesting to me, so I was right on that. Here's a quick summary of the plot of Gifted. Erin is the smartest girl in her grade, and in a society where intelligence is valued over everything, she is able to secure the job with the highest honor in her city, and make enough money to support her parents. But once she gets there, she realizes this dream job wasn't quite what she thought it would be. Can she use her intelligence and compassion to take down one society to save another? So let's get into my thoughts on this. If you're looking for the vibes of Divergent, this definitely has it. There is a certain point that it may have crossed in the inspiration versus copying vibes, but you definitely get the same energy as Divergent. It's basically this like utopian city that has these organizational structures and it's stuck within walls, and you have to be a certain type of person to succeed within those walls, and then there's another society outside of the walls, which is basically like a majority of what Divergent is. The world building is really strong. You fully understand everything about the society. You understand like the politics, you understand the history, you get some quote from like different societal texts at the beginning of each chapters where you can like understand why people in the society hold certain values. And it's all very clear because it's well thought out and well explained. There is a really strong juxtaposition between the like concept of us versus them. And by having Erin be basically a stickler for how the society is run and having her be adopted by parents from outside of the walls who have like a different perspective on the world, there is this great middle ground where she lands because of that. It's really unique to see how that lays out in that us versus them juxtaposition. So let's get into the things that I think could be improved. I will say that this is very obviously the first book she has written. It's very apparent. It's not quite the same feeling as like a fan fiction of Divergent, but it's got the same kind of energy as a fan fiction while being its own fully encapsulated story. There are some aspects that just come with like the experience of getting better at writing, and those are a majority of what I am pointing out in this book that are just like, you just need more practice. And I definitely think that there is more potential for Kora's books going forward to grow if she's like open to taking the criticism people put out in their reviews on her books. There are a few continuity errors, things that aren't like, oh, well, that was supposed to be in that room and now it's in this room, things that are like bigger. So there was one point where they said they had 7 days to take care of something, being vague to avoid spoilers here. And then something dramatic happened that caused Erin to like lock herself in her room for 4 days, which had me thinking like, girl, you have 3 days left. And then suddenly a week had passed. Like we just were told a week had passed and then a few more weeks had passed. And I'm just like, hey, wasn't that supposed to happen in 7 days? What? We had like all of these very high tension and then it's just weeks have passed. If you hired an editor that did more than just proofreading, if you hired like an actual editor, they would look out for those kinds of things. So I think that there's a chance that she didn't. And going along with that, the way time presented itself was very inconsistent. And it's like, oh, I've been awake for 48 hours straight. But why? There were times where they were like, we're gonna go out and then we'll be back in time for work or whatever. But it's like, when do you sleep? There was a lot of things that just like bounced around because time didn't really have any meaning. And I wish that time had more meaning, and I wish that those like continuity things were all tied together. Something else that I think could be improved is that I got 45% of the way into the book and we hadn't been introduced to the conflict yet. Like, we were thoroughly introduced to the society. We were thoroughly introduced to who Erin is. We were thoroughly introduced to why she has her goals and what her goals are and how they relate to everything else that's going on in the history of this place and how she got to where she was. But we weren't introduced to the conflict until we got 45% of the way in. You were so strongly into who Erin is as a character that you're like, oh, she won't go for this. Well, we're gonna have to convince her, but we're already 45% of the way in. So like, how are we gonna convince her? And then one instance happens and she's like 180, complete opposite, full turnaround, full stop. She's no longer the character that we met for the first 45% of the book. She just completely changed her mind, which is not ideal. I would say, for your main character's motivation. It definitely leads them away from being believable because they don't have any struggle. It's just like an instant, never mind, I changed my mind. I'm gonna go against everything I've believed my whole life that you've been introduced for the last 45% of this book for me to believe, and that's what we're just gonna go with. There's also an insta-love in this book. And it's like, it's painful how instant it is. There's no buildup, which kind of leads into my next thing, which is that we don't get enough interactions with the characters. This book is very reliant on world building and like telling you things that are going on rather than showing you things and like having the characters motivate the story. It's all very plot driven, and that has a lot of potential to be better if the character was driving the story. If Erin was a bit more fleshed out, a bit more unique of a person, a bit less like, I'm plain and I'm smart. Like those are her main traits, which then leads into less good storytelling, very low character motivation, which instigates having a 180 and totally changing your perspective because your character has no ground to stand on. She's just floating in the ether and there to do whatever you want her to. Very awkward dialogue because you don't really have a character to like make it make sense. It's just like, I need to get this information out, so you're gonna say it. And that's not the best. We've all been there though. It's not the best. And just general bad relationships between characters and a lack of interactions that are meaningful because you don't have a character that's putting value into those characters. And there's just some general grammatical issues throughout it where like a word is not actually what that word means, or commas and stuff is just not quite there. And it really just needed a professional editor to look at it because that would have solved a few problems. But I did desperately want to enjoy this book. I really, really did. And I don't know if that set it up for failure, that I wasn't like coming in neutral. I just really wanted it to be a good book because you don't really get many dystopians anymore. The era of dystopians with like Hunger Games and Divergent, those books was like a really good time for reading for me. I really enjoyed those books and I understand why she wanted to write this. I just wish there was a little bit more to it. So what can writers learn from this book? Take inspiration where it comes to you. Really give yourself the opportunity to be able to write the book that you want to read. You have that ability, and that's a great reason why this book came into existence, was she wanted another book that made her feel like Divergent did. So now she has one. Something else we can learn from this is to play to your strengths, but also don't be afraid to ask for help and feedback from somebody who is educated on what you're trying to do and somebody that you trust to actually tell you the truth. It's incredibly useless to get useless feedback. So if you're gonna have somebody who's like 100% always for whatever you're gonna do, they're not the person to reach out to. If you're gonna have somebody who is 100% like, ugh, why are you doing this? They're not the person to reach out to. You want to have somebody who is not really invested in you personally in terms of that scale, but somebody who knows like, this is what good storytelling is. These are the things that you need to look out for when you are doing good storytelling. And I'm gonna tell it to you straight because if I tell it to you straight, you're more likely to succeed. That's what you want from somebody who you're getting help from. So being sure to look out for somebody who is going to tell it to you straight and not have those like subjective, oh, well, I don't like it when you write in present tense, so maybe you should write in past tense instead. Somebody who understands storytelling. Have them give you feedback because this book just needed somebody who understood storytelling to give some feedback before it went out. And I feel pretty confident in that, maybe proofreader as well. But there's so much potential in this story that I was desperate for it to be good, and it just needed that extra push, that extra set of eyes. I don't know what the editing process was for this book, but it wasn't extensive enough, or it wasn't wasn't coming from an educated enough resource on that. It could have been self-editing, which is totally an important part of the writing process, but it's always better to have somebody else take a look at it before you put it out into the world and get somebody else who knows what they're doing to say like, yeah, this is good. And I don't know if that's what happened. I know a lot of people have enjoyed this book. It's a good story. It's really simple in terms of the storytelling, but it's enjoyable if you're not thinking too hard about it. I choose to think too hard about it while I'm reading books. So it's got like mixed reviews from people who think really hard like me, and then people who just wanted like that kind of good conquers evil and like compassion is good kind of story, and they enjoyed this. But that is all that I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It'll really help me out. Have you read Gifted? Have you read Divergent? Would you want to read another book that's like Divergent? Have you seen Kora Greenwood's TikToks? Because I've seen multiple reviews where people were like, I saw her TikTok, so I read this book, which I think is amazing that TikTok is becoming that kind of resource for self-published authors to get their books out into the world. But I'm just curious if you've heard of this book before I brought it up. If you don't want to miss any of my uploads, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it. I will be here every Tuesday and Saturday for Writing Tip Tuesdays and Story Study Saturdays. So I will see you guys on Tuesday.